The flashlight beam should not have bent like that. I was 11 miles into the backcountry loop at Olympic National Park, alone, because my hiking partner bailed with food poisoning and I'm an idiot who decided, I'll just go solo, it's fine. It was fine. Until it wasn't. My headlamp died at 9:40 p.m. I checked. Brand new batteries, Duracell, bought that morning at the gas station on Route 101. I remember the receipt because I'd shoved it in my pocket out of habit. When I pulled the dead headlamp apart later, the batteries weren't dead. They were ice cold, like they'd been sitting in a freezer, even though the air that night was 58 degrees. I want to be clear that I'm not someone who believes in this stuff. I'm a dental hygienist from Tacoma. I floss for a living. But I need to write this down because 3 weeks later, I still can't sleep with the lights off, and the park service report I filed got marked resolved, no further action, without anyone actually talking to me again. So here's what happened. I'd set up camp off the Whole River Trail, a backcountry site I'd reserved properly, permit and everything, Site 14, if anyone wants to check the logs. Around 10 p.m., after my headlamp died, I heard footsteps. Slow ones? The kind that don't try to be quiet but also don't sound like they're in a hurry, which somehow felt worse than either. I called out, thinking it was another hiker. A voice answered. Male, calm, said he was a ranger doing a night sweep because of recent cougar activity, and that I should get back in my tent and zip it up tight. I felt relief. An actual ranger, out here, checking on me. I thanked him. I asked if he could shine his light over so I could see him, since mine had died. He said his light was also acting up. Weird with the batteries out here, he said, and laughed a little. I laughed too. We talked for almost 10 minutes through the tent fabric. He asked where I was from. He asked if I was alone. He asked if anyone knew exactly which site I was staying at. That's when the dread set in. Rangers doing safety checks don't usually ask a lone woman if anyone knows where she is. I didn't answer right away. He repeated the question, same calm tone, like it was totally normal. Does anyone know which site you're at? I said my boyfriend was meeting me in the morning. I don't have a boyfriend. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when someone realizes you've just lied to protect yourself, and they know it, and they let the silence sit there anyway. And if that sentence alone made the hair on your arm stand up, you already know what to do before we go further. He didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then he said, Okay. Good. Stay zipped in. And the footsteps moved away. I sat there with my knees against my chest until almost 2 a.m., listening. At some point I realized the footsteps hadn't gone toward the trail. They'd gone in a slow circle around my tent. Twice. That was night 1. I stayed 2 more nights because I'd already hiked 11 miles in and didn't want to do it in the dark, and because some stupid part of me told myself it was nothing. A weird off-duty employee, a prank, an actual cougar walking on 2 feet in my exhausted imagination. I almost convinced myself. Almost. On night 3, I found something at the edge of my site that ended that theory completely. A pair of boot prints, government-issue tread pattern, pressed into the mud in a tight circle around my tent stakes. But no prints leading in, and no prints leading out. Just the circle. Like whatever made them had been standing there the whole time, or hadn't walked there at all. I packed up at first light and hiked out faster than I've ever moved in my life. If you're reading this and you've ever camped backcountry alone, I need you to actually think back. Did a ranger ever ask you where exactly you were staying, before confirming who they even were? Because when I called the Olympic NP Ranger Station after I got back to cell service, they told me there was no night patrols scheduled in that section of the Whole River corridor that week. No ranger had been assigned. Nobody. I filed an incident report. Case number ONP 2026-0447, for anyone who wants to look it up through a public records request, though I was told most of it would stay internal. A ranger I spoke to, a real one this time, I checked his badge twice, told me, off the record, that they get a few of these every season. Hikers describing a calm male voice that knows things it shouldn't, that asks the same specific question every single time. Does anyone know which site you're at? I keep wondering what would have happened if I told him the truth. If anyone else has had something, ranger, hunter, stranger, ask them that exact question in the woods at night. I need to know I'm not the only one this happened to. There's a specific kind of fear that comes from realizing you've already survived the worst night of your life and didn't even know it was happening. And if that thought just made your stomach drop, you already know what to do. I went back to check on the actual physical camera, because I needed to know if this was real. The SD card was fine. But the camera itself, mounted to a tree 8 feet up, had 3 deep gouges across the casing. Not bear claw marks. I looked those up, they didn't match. These were straight, parallel, evenly spaced, like fingers. That was 6 weeks ago. I haven't gone back to that site. I posted the footage to a forestry forum, and a retired USFS employee replied saying he'd seen the same 4-point eye pattern, reported twice before in incident logs from that same ranger district, both times near water, both times in the fall. I checked. My site was 40 yards from a creek. It was October. If you run trail cameras and you've ever pulled a card expecting deer footage and gotten something that stood still for hours instead, I need to see it. Compare timestamps with me. I want to know how many of these overlap. Has anyone else's trail cam ever caught something standing still for hours, facing a tent, with eye shine that didn't match any animal in the field guide? The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. to 5:58 a.m. Same spot. It never moved once. I run a small outdoors channel, nothing big, a few thousand subscribers, and I'd set up a trail camera near my campsite in the Allegheny National Forest mostly for b-roll of deer and maybe a black bear if I got lucky. I checked the footage 2 days later, back home, on my laptop, with coffee, expecting nothing. What I got instead was a tall shape, easily 7 feet judging against my tent pole, standing motionless at the tree line for over 6 hours straight. Not pacing. Not adjusting. Just standing, facing my tent, while I slept 15 feet away with zero idea. The strange part wasn't even the height. It was the eye shine. Most nocturnal animals reflect headlights or infrared in pairs. 2 dots, evenly spaced, animal height. This had 4 points of reflection, arranged wrong, too high off the ground to match any local wildlife, and they never blinked. Not once in 6 hours of footage. I told myself it had to be a glitch, double exposure, some camera malfunction from the cold. I almost convinced myself completely, until I noticed the timestamp glitch wasn't a glitch. The camera had captured normal footage before 11:47 and normal footage after 5:58. Only that 6-hour window was wrong. Like something had taken control of those specific hours and nothing else. There's a specific kind of fear that comes from realizing you've already survived the worst night of your life and didn't even know it was happening. And if that thought just made your stomach drop, you already know what to do. I went back to check on the actual physical camera, because I needed to know if this was real. The SD card was fine. But the camera itself, mounted to a tree 8 feet up, had 3 deep gouges across the casing. Not bear claw marks. I looked those up, they didn't match. These were straight, parallel, evenly spaced, like fingers. That was 6 weeks ago. I haven't gone back to that site. I posted the footage to a forestry forum, and a retired USFS employee replied saying he'd seen the same 4-point eye pattern, reported twice before in incident logs from that same ranger district, both times near water, both times in the fall. I checked. My site was 40 yards from a creek. It was October. If you run trail cameras and you've ever pulled a card expecting deer footage and gotten something that stood still for hours instead, I need to see it. Compare timestamps with me. I want to know how many of these overlap. Has anyone else's trail cam ever caught something standing still for hours, facing a tent, with eye shine that didn't match any animal in the field guide? The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. to 5:58 a.m. Same spot. It never moved once. I run a small outdoors channel, nothing big, a few thousand subscribers, and I'd set up a trail camera near my campsite in the Allegheny National Forest, mostly for B-roll of deer and maybe a black bear if I got lucky. I checked the footage 2 days later, back home, on my laptop, with coffee, expecting nothing. What I got instead was a tall shape, easily 7 feet judging against my tent pole, standing motionless at the tree line for over 6 hours straight. Not pacing. Not adjusting. Just standing, facing my tent, while I slept 15 feet away with zero idea. The strange part wasn't even the height. It was the eye shine. Most nocturnal animals reflect headlights or infrared in pairs. 2 dots, evenly spaced, animal height. This had 4 points of reflection, arranged wrong, too high off the ground to match any local wildlife, and they never blinked. Not once in 6 hours of footage. I told myself it had to be a glitch, double exposure, some camera malfunction from the cold. I almost convinced myself completely, until I noticed the timestamp glitch wasn't a glitch. The camera had captured normal footage before 11:47 and normal footage after 5:58. Only that 6-hour window was wrong. Like something had taken control of those specific hours and nothing else. The SD card had 1,847 photos on it. I only needed to see one to call the sheriff's department. I'm a wildlife volunteer for a conservation nonprofit. We run motion-triggered trail cameras through a stretch of national forest in the Cascades to track elk migration patterns. Boring work, mostly. Months of nothing but deer, the occasional bear, raccoons setting off the trigger at 3 a.m. for no reason. I'd been doing it for 2 seasons. Nothing prepared me for Camera 14. Camera 14 sat at the edge of a logging road, bolted 8 feet up a Douglas fir, angled down a game trail that hadn't seen elk traffic in weeks according to the data. When I pulled the card in October, the timestamp metadata showed something that made the tech volunteer at our office go quiet for a long time. 340 photos. All triggered between 2:58 a.m. and 3:04 a.m. 6 minutes. 340 motion triggers. The camera's max capture rate should have produced maybe 40 in that window. I want to say up front that I'm not a believer in anything. I have a biology degree. I think most cryptid stuff is misidentified bears or hoaxes. But I need to write down what I saw, because the official report from the Forest Service closed the file as equipment malfunction. And I don't think that's what happened. The first photo in the sequence shows nothing unusual, just the trail, lit gray-green by the infrared flash, ferns swaying like something brushed past. The second photo, taken 0.4 seconds later, shows a shape at the very edge of the frame. Tall. Too tall. The trail marker post beside it is 6 feet, and the shape's shoulders were level with the top of it. I told myself it was a bear standing on its hind legs. Bears do that. It's the most common explanation and it's almost always right. I felt better having a reason. I went through the next 40 photos looking for the moment it dropped back to 4 legs and lumbered off into the brush like bears do. It never dropped to 4 legs. In every single frame across those 6 minutes, it stayed upright. And by photo 9, you can see what bears don't have, a clearly defined neck narrower than the head and the shoulders, the kind of proportion that exists on something built to walk, not something built to run on all fours. Like bait line. There's a specific kind of cold that goes through you when you realize the thing you've been calling definitely just a bear out loud has better posture than you do, and if that thought alone made you sit up a little straighter, you already know what to do before we go further. By photo 60 it had moved closer to the camera. Close enough that the infrared caught its eyes. 2 flat circles of white-green reflection, spaced wider than a bear's, set higher on what should have been a face. There was no photo where you could see clear detail. It was always half-turned, or backlit wrong, or just outside the focal sweet spot. Almost like it knew where the lens was. That was the trail camera footage from 3 weeks ago. Since then, 2 more cameras on that same logging road have gone completely dark, not malfunctioning, not knocked over, just stopped transmitting data entirely, like something disabled them without leaving a mark. Camera 14 itself is still up. I haven't gone back to check it. Nobody on our volunteer team will. When I brought the photos to my supervisor, she did the responsible thing. She contacted the District Forest Service office and a wildlife biologist who had worked the region for 19 years. He looked at the sequence for almost 10 minutes without saying anything. Then he asked me a question I didn't expect. He asked if camera 14 had audio capability. It didn't, the model only does stills. He seemed relieved by that, which somehow scared me more than anything in the photos themselves. If you've ever set up a trail camera in deep forest and pulled a card with a burst of timestamps clustered in a tiny window like that, more triggers than the hardware should physically produce, I need you to go check those files again. Not the photos. The metadata. Because the biologist told me, off the record, that he's seen that exact triggering pattern 3 times before in 20 years. Always in the same general region of the Cascades. Always written off internally as sensor glitch, and never once investigated past that. He gave me a name for it, informally, that he said wasn't official terminology, and that I shouldn't repeat publicly. I'm not going to put it here. I don't think I need to. What I will say is that the Forest Service Incident Log, case reference CW 2026-1182, if anyone with the right access wants to pull it, lists camera 14's location as temporarily decommissioned, pending equipment review. It's still bolted to that tree. I checked the GPS coordinates on a satellite map 2 nights ago at 1 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, just to make sure the pin was still where I remembered it being. It had moved 40 feet. Trail cameras don't move themselves, and Forest Service satellite tracking doesn't just drift by 40 feet for no reason. If anyone else runs wildlife cameras and has ever had a unit relocate itself, or pulled a burst trigger sequence like mine, I need to hear about it, because right now I'm the only name on this report, and I don't like that. 3 hours after I should have reached the trailhead, my GPS still showed me standing exactly on the blue line. I was not standing on the blue line. I do search and rescue volunteer work in northern Idaho, which means I know these mountains better than most people know their own neighborhoods. I've pulled 6 people off this exact ridge system in the last 4 years. So when I tell you I got disoriented on a trail I've hiked maybe 30 times, I need you to understand that's not normal for me. That's not a rookie mistake story. Something else happened. It started small. I was doing a solo maintenance hike, clearing blowdown off the state line trail, GPS unit clipped to my pack out of habit more than necessity. Around 4 p.m., I stopped to drink water and noticed the trail forked. There is no fork on that trail. I've walked it dozens of times. I checked my GPS. It showed a single unbroken line, no fork, exactly like it should. But standing right in front of me were 2 paths, equally worn, equally real, diverging around a boulder that I also didn't remember being there. I took the left fork because the GPS arrow seemed to lean that way. In hindsight, I think that's exactly what I was supposed to think. The trail felt right for about 20 minutes. Then I noticed the trees were wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way. Wrong in a way you only catch if you've spent years staring at the same forest. The moss pattern on the north-facing trunks was inverted. Moss grows on the north side up here. Every time, no exceptions. It's basically how I navigate without a compass. On this stretch, it was growing on the south side of every tree for almost a mile. I told myself I'd lost track of direction, that the sun was playing tricks through cloud cover, that I was tired and overthinking moss growth like an idiot. I felt embarrassed more than scared. I sat down, ate a granola bar, recalibrated, told myself the rational explanation was simply that I, a professional, had made a stupid mistake. That feeling lasted exactly as long as it took me to notice the boot prints in the mud ahead of me. They were my boot prints. My specific tread pattern, my exact stride length. I know this because I checked it against my own boot afterward, pressed it into soft dirt, measured the gap between strides. Identical. Except I hadn't walked this section. I was sure of that. I would have remembered the fallen cedar blocking half the path, the kind you have to duck under at an awkward angle that throws your balance off. Unless I had walked it. Unless somewhere in the last hour, I'd lost time I didn't know I'd lost. There's nothing that unmakes your sense of reality faster than finding your own footprints somewhere you're certain you've never been. And if that thought just made your stomach drop a little, you already know what to do before this gets worse. I checked my watch. 5:40 p.m. I'd started the maintenance hike at 11 a.m., expecting to be done by 2. Somewhere, I'd lost almost 4 hours I couldn't account for in any normal sense. Breaks, distance covered, water consumed. My water bottle, which I'd filled completely that morning, was down to a quarter tank, like I'd been hiking far harder and far longer than the timeline made sense for. That was 6 days ago. I made it out that night, eventually, by doing something I tell every lost hiker never to do. I ignored the GPS completely and followed the actual slope of the land downhill until I hit a logging road. The GPS, the entire time, insisted I was on the marked trail, moving in a straight, confident line toward the trailhead. It was wrong by almost 2 miles. When I reported it to my SR unit lead, expecting concern, I got something stranger, a kind of tired recognition. He pulled up an internal log most of the volunteers don't have access to, a running document of navigation anomalies on that specific ridge going back 11 years. Compass spin, GPS drift, hikers reporting trail forks that don't exist on any survey map. Always the same stretch, always between roughly 3 and 6 p.m., always resolving the moment someone abandons the marked trail entirely and just walks downhill. If you've ever hiked a familiar trail and felt certain, just for a second, that the moss was growing on the wrong side of the trees, or that a fork existed where your map insists there's only one path, I need you to trust that instinct immediately and not waste 20 minutes rationalizing it like I did. Whatever's out there on that ridge isn't subtle about creating doubt. It's patient about it. Our unit filed it informally as case reference SAR ID 2026-0089, mostly so future volunteers doing maintenance work in that section would be flagged to hike in pairs after 2 p.m. Nobody wanted to write. The trail rearranges itself in an official document, so it just says, "Navigational hazard, cause undetermined." I went back 4 days ago, in daylight, with a partner, to retrieve tools I'd left behind in my confusion. The fork was gone. One single trail, exactly like the GPS always insisted. The fallen cedar I ducked under was there though, half-rotted, clearly down for years, moss thick and undisturbed across the whole length of it. There were no boot prints anywhere near it. Not even mine, from 4 days before. I do this for a living. I know what disorientation feels like, and this wasn't that. If anyone else has lost hours on a familiar trail, or found a fork that vanished afterward, I need to know how common this actually is. Because right now it feels like just me and an 11-year-old internal log nobody talks about. We counted heads around the fire and came up one short. 40 minutes later, something in the woods knew his name. 4 of us went up to a backcountry site near the Sawtooth Range over Labor Day weekend. Me, my college roommate Derek, his girlfriend Priya, and her brother Wes. We'd done this trip every year for 6 years. Same general route, same easy banter, same lazy 2-mile hike to a lake nobody else seemed to know about. Nothing about this trip should have been different. Wes went to refill water bottles at the creek about 50 yards from camp, alone, around 6:45 p.m. while there was still light. He didn't come back. After 20 minutes we started calling for him, normal volume, slightly worried, the kind of calling out you do when someone's probably just wandered to look at something interesting. After 40 minutes, Derek and I split up to search, and that's when Priya, staying at camp with the fire and the flashlight, heard Wes call her name from the tree lean behind the tents. She said it sounded exactly right. His pitch, his specific way of drawing out her name when he wanted attention. Priya. Something only someone who'd known him 15 years could fake convincingly. She started walking toward the voice with the flashlight before some instinct made her stop about 10 feet from the trees. She said the second time he called her name, it came from a different spot. 30 feet to the left of where the first call came from, and there's no way a person moves that fast through dense brush without making any sound doing it. When Derek and I came back to camp without finding Wes, Priya told us about the voice, and for a few minutes we genuinely felt relieved. We decided Wes must be circling back through the trees, maybe disoriented, maybe playing some stupid prank because that's exactly the kind of thing Wes would do. We laughed about it, actually. Called out his name together, all three of us, feeling stupid and slightly better. The voice answered again. This time it called out Derek's name back to us. Said it in Wes's exact voice, with Wes's exact phrasing. "You scared yet, man?" Something Wes says constantly when he jump scares people. Derek went pale in a way I'd never seen on him before, because apparently that specific phrase, those exact words, was something only the two of them had said to each other, as a private running joke since freshman year. Nobody else knew it. Not even me, and I'd been friends with both of them for 6 years. There's a moment where you realize the thing calling out to you knows something it has no possible way of knowing, and your brain just stops trying to find the normal explanation, because there isn't one. And if that sentence made the hair on your neck stand up, you already know what to do before this gets worse. We didn't go toward the voice again. We backed toward the fire, all three of us in a tight cluster, and the call-in continued for almost another hour. Sometimes Wes's voice, twice what sounded like an older man none of us recognized, calling out random encouraging things like, "You're almost there," and "Just a little further," like it was trying to coax someone, anyone, into the dark. That was 2 hours after Wes first went missing. We called search and rescue the moment we had a signal, which took another 40 minutes of hiking toward higher ground. They found Wes just after midnight, nearly a mile from camp, in the opposite direction from the creek, sitting against a tree with no memory of how he got there. He said he remembered filling the water bottles, then remembered walking, a long time, he thought, though it felt like minutes, towards someone calling his name in a voice he recognized as his own father's. His father died 4 years ago. He never reached whoever was calling. He said the voice always stayed just out of sight, just past the next tree line, the next ridge, and at some point he simply stopped, sat down, and couldn't remember deciding to do that. If you've ever been camping and heard someone call your name from the dark in a voice that sounded right but came from somewhere it shouldn't have, or doubled back on itself faster than a person could move, please don't walk toward it like Priya almost did. The SAR team that found Wes told us, quietly, away from him, that this exact pattern shows up in their incident reports more than people realize. Someone separated from a group, then a familiar voice calling from the wrong direction, drawing the remaining group members toward the woods instead of toward help. They filed it as case reference SAR ID 2026-0212, classified as disorientation, contributing factors unclear. Wes spent 2 days in observation. The doctors found nothing wrong with him physically. He still won't talk about what the voice said in the final minutes before he sat down against that tree. None of us have gone camping together since. Wes still flinches when someone calls his name from another room. If anyone else has heard a voice in the woods that knew something private it shouldn't have known, I need to hear how you got everyone back to the fire safely, because I'm honestly not sure we did the right thing that night.